I was listening to another nonprofit podcast, and they were talking about how great endowments are. This isn't something we've ever really considered, and it feels like it may be really complicated. Is it worth the effort for a small organization like ours, $1 million annual budget? Honestly, I like the idea of having money just arrive year after year.
So my first, there are other nonprofit podcasts? I wasn't aware of that.
Oh no, ours is the only one.
I'm pretty sure ours is the only one. So I'm not quite sure what this could possibly be referring to. Yeah. So I think I'll say I have a different lens than most people on endowments, primarily because my role is I'm always like the finance guy. And it's something that I've heard many, many times from board members, from members of the community, from foundations that want to give you money, from executive directors who heard about it somewhere or was being, as being potentially a donor is talking to them about something that they might want to do. The concept of an endowment, we'll just start there for those of you that aren't super familiar with it, is that a donor will give you a pool of money and they put some restrictions on that money such that you can never spend it. So, Stacey, I would like to give your nonprofit organization $1 million, but you can't spend it. Woo-hoo. And what you're going to, boo, yay, boo. What the idea behind it is that they're going to give you this chunk of money that's bigger than you could spend necessarily right away, and you'll invest it. And then you'll use the proceeds from those investments to fund ongoing operations. And it sort of came about from, I don't think nonprofits thought of this themselves. So no development person said, I've got this great idea, right? This was a funder who was trying to give money to an organization, but didn't want to give them too much money. They started back when we had things like death taxes. We don't necessarily have those anymore, but we used to have, when someone would die, the federal government would say, "Oh, too bad you're dead. Give us half your money and you can give the other half to your heirs." If you were to give the money away before you die, or as part of your as part of what happens to the contract when you right as you die, like you can protect that money from going to the federal government because you've given it away to a nonprofit instead. So you can direct that tax to where you want it to go rather than having it go to whatever the federal government's going to spend it on. And this is very compelling to people who have a lot of money. They would rather give to a cause that they care about rather than having someone else decide what that cause is supposed to be. So they were much more common in the 1950s and 1960s and 1970s than there are today because we had death taxes. We haven't had death taxes for a while. It's the kind of thing that used to sort of yo-yo from administration to administration. They'd appear and then they'd disappear, and they'd appear and they'd disappear. We'd see, from a fundraising perspective, you'd get all these big gifts that would come in when there were taxes. You'd see fundraising go up, and then when the taxes went away, fundraising would go back down. It was a clear driver of nonprofits getting larger gifts. So major gifts are directly connected to these taxes that come and go. But it's kind of stuck in the popular imagination because of this idea, like the person asks in the question, of if somebody gave you a giant chunk of money and then you invested it, then you could have just a smaller chunk of money just magically appear in your bank account at the beginning of the year, which means that you don't have to do as much fundraising, right? So if somebody gave you $100 million and they could spin off $5 million a year, like, we could just get rid of our entire development staff because we don't need them. We've got $5 million a year. We can just spend it and go on our merry way. So that's the argument for them. The argument for them is that this is a really great way to sort of make sure, and you hear this, endow an organization, make sure this organization stays in business for a really long time and they don't have to worry about this revenue problem that they have over and over and over again, right? The argument against them is, there are a couple of them. One is that by any time that you provide restrictions on funding, regardless of what the reason for the restrictions are, it makes it harder for the nonprofit to do its job. So this is a very hard restriction. It's before we made several years ago, the FASB and the IRS decided that we were going to change the way we do financial accounting for nonprofits because it's fun to make them scramble and do new things. We used to have this thing called permanently restricted, and that's what that referred to. So permanently restricted funding was money that was from an endowment that you can't spend the pool of money that they give you at the outset, which is called the corpus, which is Latin for body, which is connected to the death thing, which I think is hilarious. So like they give you the corpus and you can't spend the corpus, but you can spend any earnings that you can get off of that. But so number one, we've got this restriction that we need to keep track of. Number two, now there's a whole bunch of federal law that goes on top of it. So there's one called the UPMIFA, which is the Uniform Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act, which basically tells nonprofits how they're supposed to manage their endowments. So now you've got this whole new set of rules that you're required to follow. Then on top of that, you have to come up with an investment policy because somebody just gave you $10 million and you can't just be like, roll CDs, right? You have to come up with something that... Yeah. That protects it, that manages risk, which means now you're talking to investment managers and they come in with the most hilarious like decks of like, here's all the fantastic things we're going to do for you. And your board is going to glaze over and want to go with the guy they like, right? It gets really, really complicated and uncomfortable. So from a CFO perspective or a finance perspective, it's a project. It's not something that just like magically the money appears. It's a lot of work. On the other side, when you give a nonprofit organization a lot of money and say you have to leave in an endowment and you can get some of that money a little bit at a time, you've taken away some of the impetus of that nonprofit organization responding to the community. So this is the other reason that I don't particularly like them, is that when you have to have donors talking to people about what the mission of the organization is, it means you really need to refine what your mission is. You need to make sure that you're doing a good job, that you're responding to it properly, that you're super effective. And when there's just money rolling in and you don't have to think about that as much anymore, there's the opportunity to just go, we're good, right? Everything we're doing is fine because we've got this big pot of money. We're just going to roll with this big pot of money. It also, because that money's locked up as a permanent endowment, like you can't borrow from it. There's no way to go, hey, we've got this fantastic opportunity to solve this thing. Wouldn't it be great if we could just throw $3 million at it right now? And by the way, we've got $10 million locked up. We can't touch it. Even if $3 million would solve our problem permanently, you can't touch that money. It's stuck forever. You can actually, there's ways to do it, but the rules are such that like, I have a really great idea doesn't raise to the level of being able to get to that money. Like the only way you can get to that money is if you can prove that the restriction that's on that money is not, you can't ever achieve it. Like the thing they restricted it to is no longer an issue. Like, I used to say like, if somebody gave you a whole bunch of money to eradicate polio and polio is already eradicated, then maybe you could get that unrestricted. But as of the way we're going today, we may have polio again pretty soon. So maybe that's not even a good argument, right? So I would say on balance, it's something that you need to really seriously consider. You need to think really hard about, is this something that we want to manage? Does all of the extra work that we have to do in order to lock this money up and spend it in the way that we're required to spend it, is that worth the effort that we need to expend to make this happen? And is there a way that we can convince this donor that's really interested in endowments to maybe come up with some other set of restrictions that satisfies their need? So, because one of the reasons they're giving you this money, they don't want to give it all to you at once, is they want you to live forever. They want you to continue to do the work. That's the good reason. The bad reason is that they don't trust you with all the money right now. Because if I give you $10 million, I guarantee you're going to roll out and immediately buy a helicopter. I guarantee it, right? So as long as you can come up with something that sort of helps that donor understand that we don't need to live forever, we need to solve this problem as best we can and as fast as we can. And we're also not going to buy a helicopter, so don't worry about that. That's the communication that you want to have with that donor, and not like, let's go find an investment manager. Like that's really boring and not part of the day-to-day work. So I've talked for a super long time, Stacey. What do you think?
I love everything you shared. And I just want to add a few other things that are on my mind with it. So I do think we have to also be aware, not all donors, because probably less sophisticated donors, they don't even really understand an endowment. A lot of people don't, right? But for those donors that may be more sophisticated or do a lot of financial planning in their world, sometimes you will hear those donors talk about an endowment actually signals financial strength and stability to me as a donor. I go, wow, like this organization has this long-term strategy of making sure they're around because I do want to support an organization that's thinking in a smart way about it. So I think that you also have to take into consideration what kind of donor base you have. I think it's a huge part of this. Like the other equation to this that we haven't talked about is just basically what is the current financial health of your organization and your fundraising capacity. Because two things, right? If you don't have any operating reserves or you have very limited operating reserves and you're going full throttle to, right, like this donor's giving you an endowment, or you're like, yay, let's go try to fundraise for endowment, and you don't even have money for like a rainy day fund, that, right, like let's prioritize here. And to me, so I go, if I'm thinking of an organization's health, I want to first make sure, like, are you solvent in just most basic of ways? And before we even start thinking about long-term like financial strategy, which is what we're talking about with endowment. But the other thing I would be thinking about is, unless you actually have like a really healthy reserve, you have a really sort of steady, strong donor base that you could potentially even ask to let's say, I mean, it is a donor who gives you the endowment, but let's say I've also heard this, and I'm sure you have, Andy, how many organizations are like, we should create an endowment on our own and fundraise for the endowment. It wasn't even something someone gave us. We're just going to start creating an endowment. And to do that, like that is a different approach to fundraising. It is a tough approach for many because they want to feel like they want to know that their dollars today is making a difference in the near future and not that they have to wait forever. So it can be really tough. I mean, not that it can't be done, right? People, we know, really large healthcare institutions, universities, they're known for this. But at the end of the day, it's you're saying you're a small organization with a $1 million annual budget. I just have a whole lot of questions about what's your donor base already, and could you accomplish the same thing, but in a different way? I mean, let's think about monthly giving donors. Every single fundraising data point over the last couple of years has been like monthly giving donors tend to be the best for repeat donations because they just have it baked into what they're doing already. It's kind of right, like they forget they've even done it. Or maybe even if you are communicative with them, which you should be, like maybe they do remember, but it's sort of like, oh, cool. Like it's just on autopilot. Like, so you get that, you do that work. You're still doing the work, just like you have to do to manage an endowment, to your point, Andy, right? Like you still need to have an investment strategy and investment advisors and someone who's overseeing all of it and managing it. Like there's work regardless. So there is no, like, I think this idea of this kind of, oh, we just want passive income. I mean, trust me, if I could figure that out for my own life, I would do it. It would make life a lot easier, but I'm not, it doesn't ever exist. I was laughing because I not too long ago said something like that to a friend of mine who's a financial advisor. And I said, oh, you just have, you really get to like post for the most part because, you kind of have all these, like, you just get these fees and it's sort of passive income. And I thought she was going to kill me. And I don't blame her because she was like, are you kidding? Right. Point is I think nothing is that easy. And so thinking about all these pieces, like, I don't know, think about it different. Does it have to be an endowment? And you made all super points too, Andy. Like, I want to echo what you said, especially because, yeah, like, I don't think it's for everyone. But I do think we should look at what are some other ways we can still, if the goal is like, how do we get more sort of ongoing funding that doesn't feel like it's as heavy a lift, like the tire tiresome part of fundraising is the new, always having to find new. So how do we instead build systems and structures and fundraising mechanisms and strategies that we still have to work because we have to steward that relationship, but they're not always having to chase the new, which is what I think is sort of an underlying piece to this question too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know if somebody gave you $10 million though, you could do a pretty good donor acquisition campaign and spend some time really thinking about how you want to do cultivation long term in order to get repeat donors, right? So the again, I think the draw for an endowment really is on the donor side, is the donors not trusting you to not buy a helicopter and thinking that this is a good way for them to they've got a lot of good things they can say about why they want to give this way. And it's harder for us on the staff side to say, no, thank you for thinking of us, but that's not something that we're interested in. This $10 million, because it's just not going to help us. And it's not really going to help us long term. We're not interested in, because you said the word solvency. We don't need to be solvent. We need to be liquid. We need to make sure that the money that comes through the organization is immediately deployed at serving our mission and not sitting in a bank account somewhere earning interest. That's not a charitable purpose. From Andy's perspective, that's not a charitable purpose.
Nonprofit governance.
Nonprofit answers.
Nonprofit board. Nonprofit management.
Nonprofit marketing. Nonprofit resources.
Welcome to Nonprofit Everything, the podcast where hosts Andy Shurick and Stacey Wedding answer your questions about all things nonprofit.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Nonprofit Everything. I'm Andy Shurick. I'm here with my partner in crime, Stacey Wedding, and we're here to answer the questions that you send us about nonprofit topics. If we can't answer them, we bring in guest experts, and lately we've had some really good ones. I think we're starting the year off pretty strong with guest experts, to be honest. Last week, Stacey, because we're on video when we do this, Stacey and we are in separate spaces. We used to do it together, which was really nice. We would find a space. It
was. I miss those days.
Pre-COVID, we'd hang out together and drink a lot of coffee, and it was great.
I miss those.
Yeah. But now we're in our own spaces and we just do it over video. And last week, Stacey asked me what my favorite thing in my office was, assuming that I would say it was the velvet painting of Elvis, which it is not. The second, it's a really close second. So Stacey, what's in you're in a virtual office today. You're your background is a virtual
true.
background.
It's not even my real.
I think it's
my office is such a mess that I had to do the virtual office.
She doesn't even trust me. So when you're not in your virtual office, because the fake chairs in Ocean View is probably not accurate, what's your favorite thing in your actual office?
Okay. I really find this question to be so difficult because I have several things that are my favorite things. So it's I don't know how to limit it to one. But I'm going to tie three things together that would all be on the list. Okay. And but it's all kind of one theme. So this is how I'm going to get past having to choose just one. So I have a little sign here that says, all stressed out and no one to choke. And I really think that captures me on many days. And then I have a sign that's this big, almost aluminum sign that's back a ways, but that says stress reducer. And it's got a big circle in the middle of this aluminum sign. And it says bang head here. So you're seeing the stress theme, right? And to handle my stress with all of it, I have a little elephant. It's I love elephants, but I have my little elephant stress ball thing. It's really like a stress elephant where you squeeze it, and it's a lucky elephant because its trunk is up, because that's what when you have elephants that have their trunks up, it means good luck. So it's a good luck charm with its trunk up, and all that stress, instead of hurting myself by banging my head in that place or choking somebody else with my other sign, I just squeeze my elephant stressor. So,
well, hopefully,
does that count?
That does, and hopefully the questions today don't make you squeeze your elephant stressor too much. I'm the development manager of a small nonprofit. From time to time, we get some of our board members who suggest we do various fundraisers. Things like restaurant fundraisers where a percentage of sales comes back to our nonprofit, or a jewelry party where we'll get a percentage back for so many purchases made on a particular evening. We already have a very ambitious development plan, so I'm wondering if it makes sense to pursue these recommendations given everything else on our plates. What are your thoughts? And how do I handle this when the topic comes up at a board meeting? I don't want board members thinking I'm being difficult.
You know what I keep thinking of before I answer this question? You know what I keep thinking of, Andy, is when you've in the past talked about how board members want events because they don't actually want to fundraise and ask
Seems
people
easier.
for money. Like they want fundraising events because it's easier. I think this may actually fall in that camp sometimes as well. And in all fairness, okay, I do want to say this because I think so many times the nonprofit sector and nonprofits fall into this trap, including board members, or maybe even a board member who owns a restaurant, as an example, and is like, oh, and they truly want to help. I do think it comes from the most of the time, from a really good spot. Like, I don't think it's someone trying to screw over a nonprofit. I don't think someone's trying to make a nonprofit like do a bunch of work that isn't going to result. I don't think there's some manipulation. There's probably people who would argue against that, but I actually don't think people are putting enough time and energy into it. And because of that, that's the problem. Because if you actually look at cost benefit analysis on anything like this, a restaurant fundraiser, a jewelry party, any of these sort of, a book fundraiser, whatever, like all the things, they generally have really, really poor return. And so you've wasted, I mean, candidly, I have heard very few. I'm not even sure if I could count 3 over being in the industry and in doing work in or with the nonprofit sector for 20 plus years. I honestly don't know if I have more than 1 or 2 examples of where I've seen this really work well. So like that just from a standpoint of actually providing any kind of reasonable return. Most of the time you'll hear, it sort of, we got a few $100, if that. And when you actually start to track it, you realize how much it doesn't work. So here's some reasons why, in general, it doesn't work. Think about the psychology of your donor, right? So, Andy, you're a donor, right? You give $50 loyally every year. You're this $50 donor to this organization. And now you get an email or social media or whatever that's like telling you, hey, 5% of the proceeds if you show this flyer or come in on this night, right? Like 5% of the proceeds on this night when you mention our name are actually going to come back to us. And so you're like, okay, cool. Well, I don't have to feed the family. I can like take everyone out. We'll go out for dinner and we're going to help the nonprofit and get to eat out. So, okay, so you sit there and you go, and let's say you all in and the family, let's just say your bill, like your check, like comes back at $200. And you're like, wow, yeah, I mean, like that's $200. And so and guess what? Like 5% of $200, you're talking $10 from that dinner is going to the nonprofit, right? And yet you, as the donor, feel like you helped support them, you brought your family, like you're still thinking of how it hit your bottom line. How did it hit your wallet? $200. And you're off the hook now. You don't have to give. Like when they reach out anymore, you've done it. You've done your part. That organization has now just lost what was a $50 loyal donor has lost $40 because of this fundraiser, because you thought you were like off the hook. Now, it's not like that with everyone, but there is a psychology piece to this that you can't ignore because it's just the way minds think, and no one's going to do all the math and think about all the stuff. They're going to go, wow, I helped out. And the reality is your family probably isn't going to know anything about the organization. They're going to know about the restaurant. So cool for the restaurant. It's a real big, like, hey, restaurant got some business out of it. Now the family knows about the restaurant. Great. So the restaurant actually is probably benefiting more from a marketing lens than your nonprofit. So I also think, but I do think what happens is, sometimes it is a marketing strategy for the restaurant. And sometimes it also is we want to help and we think this is an easy way to do it, but they don't realize like it's not going to actually move the dial. So I think one way around it that I've seen organizations do is they start to come up with some sort of like an agreement or kind of commitment letter saying, we will partner with your organization, your company, your restaurant, whatever it is, your jewelry place. We will partner with you, and this is what we will do, and this is what you will do. So really clear like expectations. So you're not also ticking people off, because sometimes that's what happens with these two. And at the end of it, then you get to report back, or you get to say, and at a minimum for our time marketing our database, using our people and our contacts to get to your facility and your organization that could be repeat customers for you. Basically, we're like a marketing firm for you for this particular thing. So, hey, like we would ask for a minimum donation regardless of what happens, like of this. And so if it doesn't reach this based on the revenue generated through this event or this night, this restaurant night, your company will still step up. And I think that's where I've seen it can start to work better. Now, problem is a lot of companies and a lot of restaurants and a lot of businesses don't want to do it then, because they're like, no, like I don't want to be on the hook for it. So I think it's really hard. I also think a couple of things, like we are living in this like starved world for attention where there's too much out there all the time and competing with it. So like, do you want to use your valuable space in your social media, in your newsletter for this, versus what if you like shined a light on one of your really loyal donors? What if you like honored you got a new grant and you said, shout out to this funder? Like, how do you want to use your space? Like, do you want to detract from your mission and your impact and sort of shining a light on the people who are already supporting you to go in this direction? So I think that's another piece to think about. And then the last thought I have on this is just from a stewardship perspective. At least when you get donors or when someone engages with you in your newsletter, you can track this and you have the data. In general, there is no tracking mechanism. So, okay, you get your 10 people in your family, Andy, to go to this restaurant. Well, I don't get all their names. I don't get their contact info. I don't get anything to like follow up with them. So from a donor stewardship standpoint, like you got nothing, right? You don't get the list of names. You don't get the contact information. You don't really know, did they come? Did they just happen to be there and you benefited, or did they come for you? Like, so you don't even have data you can work with. So I hate to be so negative. And I probably now back to the like Stacey, like emails, whatever, Stacey at nonprofiteverything.com if you're angry with me, because here's the thing. I truly think when board members, when volunteers, when people see these things, I truly think they're like, wow, this is a cool, like this might be super cool. Like, and great, everyone needs to eat out, but they don't think enough and know enough about the industry to know it's literally generally one of the least cost-effective ways to raise money, visibility, or anything. So if they get back to then saying it's a fundraiser, or like it's not that either, because honestly, usually the reason your organization is being chosen is because you have a large audience and that restaurant or that group wants your audience. So like, anyway, I sound really pretty on fire, don't I, Andy? Good grief.
I get the feeling you don't like those. I think the only thing I'd add is that when you're doing that, you're competing with every elementary school, little league team, club soccer team. I mean, that's kind of the level of fundraiser that group goes to. So, because they can, if we can pitch it out to everybody that goes to this elementary school and then they'll give money to the whatever fund for the elementary school. I mean, that's not really grown up fundraising. That's low effort fundraising. And to Stacey's point, I don't know that it's worth bothering my donors for something like that. The hard part is telling, many times the restaurants don't even ask about that anymore. Like it used to be, it was a very common thing and the restaurant would come to you. Now it's just the restaurants themselves have put up a barrier because every single little league team in elementary school is trying to do it. So they've got you have to fill out the form on their website and then you're working with their agreements. the other thing that I would caution on this one, just on top of everything else, is depending on what state you live in, or what state your organization is in, I should say, you may be subject to commercial co-venture laws. So what a commercial co-venture, because here's the scenario. I've got a shady company that does random stuff, and I've made a whole bunch of advertisements on social media platform that says, for every dumb thing that I sell, 50% of the proceeds are going to help hungry kids in Spain. But I have no intention of doing that. I'm keeping the whole donation myself because I'm a shady company. So this happened enough that many states across the United States have put in rules about that specific activity. So if you are a corporation and you're saying that a portion of the proceeds, or 5%, or something specific, if that's ever said explicitly, you actually have to register with the state. You have to fill out a bunch of paperwork. You have to pay a fee in some places to say that you're going to do that, so that the state attorney general can audit the corporation later to make sure that they did it. And in some states, not only is the corporation on the hook, but the nonprofit's on the hook as well. So even if you don't know anything about it, you could get a phone call from the attorney general saying, hey, we see that XYZ gave you this amount of money. Is that the case? Right? Because you have to keep track of it as well, because theoretically anything they gave to you becomes a marketing expense and then comes off their taxes. So the state taxing authority wants to make sure that they're getting all that money too, so that puts you in their crosshairs as well. So it's just reason number, after Stacey's 56 reasons, it's reason number 57 to be very careful to enter into any kind of agreement like this, unless you have something very clear in writing.
And I do, I didn't know about that, so that's super helpful to know as well. And let me add that to my long list. I also think, right, how do you handle this topic when it comes up at a board meeting, as an example? I mean, this person who wrote in, so their development manager, they're not in this situation. This is where I think you need to have your, the executive director, or it's not that you can't, like, I just think that there needs to be something where ideally you have another board member who gets it and can be your spokesperson, or you can say, we've got a plan already. So for us to take on one other thing, like, that would mean like having to get rid of something else, and like the cost benefit, like, here's the data that is out there about these kinds of things, right? Like, so, or let's look at the cost return, instead of just saying outright, this is not going to work, or we don't think this is a smart idea, because no one wants to hear that. Like, great. Like, why don't we pull together, we'll look at the cost, benefit analysis of it. We'll talk to some other organizations we know, and just kind of, and get back to you or whatever, like something, so that you don't have to get sucked into it, because you know how it works, Andy. Like, someone brings this up and then someone's like, yeah, oh, I've got this one, and I'll go to this restaurant, and like, it's wildfires. So like, I think it's a balance. You can't, as a staff member, like basically say this is hogwash, but you can find a way to buy yourself time to at least have some data, or to have some other side conversations if you have to go this route. If with some board members, candidly, I don't think the board should be involved at this level anyway. Like, I think this is up to the executive director to take some suggestions and figure out what is the strategy and plan, and what's going to have the biggest return on the investment. But because we know boards do tend to go into these kinds of ideas and topics, you might need to do a little bit of follow-up just to show that it's not you being a jerk. I don't know, Andy, do you have another suggestion?
No, I just think you need, for bigger organizations already have this, which is probably why I didn't mention it. But like, you need to have an internal policy about this, that this is what happens when someone asks you this, because bigger organizations get hammered with this all the time. It's everybody's always asking, can we use your logo? The food bank, it was like, can we use your logo because we want to go to a can drive? And so we had like a very specific piece of paper that said, these are the rules about using our logo for a can drive, right? And so we would just like email them that back. And so having something specific in place that says, we're not using our mailing list, we won't be using social media, like, you're welcome to use our logo, you're welcome to do this, assuming you're not having a problem with commercial co-venture laws, right, where you need a specific contract. But you can just have something you send back out to them that says, this is our expectation if you want to use our logo. The food bank once, I think I've said this before, we got a strip club actually because the food bank was in Las Vegas, right? So we got a strip club that said that they wanted to do a holiday fundraiser, and they called it Cans for Cans, which I thought was hilarious. And they actually asked our permission. Is it okay if they say, bring 2 cans of food for free admission to the strip club? And there was some internal discussion. There was a robust conversation in the food bank about whether or not that was a smart idea. Eventually we decided, yeah, why not? Let him go for it. It sounds funny, and it'll be a good story later. I don't remember how much we got in cans, but like what we got back from the strip club. But it made a good relationship with the people that worked there. And potentially we got other donors that I don't actually even know about.
Hey, you made it through another episode of Nonprofit Everything. You know what your drill is now. We've asked you once, and we're going to ask you again, because repetition means sooner or later you're going to do it for us. We want you to share this. We want you to share this episode or Nonprofit Everything in your networks. Please be our ambassadors and cheerleaders. Let the world know we exist, nonprofiteverything.com, and you know they can find us on social and on Discord and on the website and all the places, because that is how we continue to grow the audience, and that's how we continue to be visible to others and have others find us. So we appreciate you being a loyal listener, and we appreciate you sharing this with others. So I want a full report from each of you who listened today. Send me an email telling me the people you sent this to, even if it's just one. Like, that'll make my heart happy. So, all right, thank you for joining.